The first drop of blood fell at exactly 3:17 a.m. Dr. Sarah Chun thought it was a trick of the emergency lighting as she walked through the Metropolitan Museum's restricted wing. But when the second drop landed on her clipboard with a wet splat, she looked up to see something that would haunt her for the rest of her short life. The marble statue of Saint Agatha was weeping tears of crimson, and in that moment, Sarah realized she had stumbled upon a secret that 10 people before her had died trying to protect. Sarah Chun had spent 15 years as the museum's chief conservator, a woman who spoke to marble and bronze the way others spoke to children. Her hands could read the story of centuries in a single crack, decode the mysteries hidden within ancient stone. The Metropolitan's night shift was her sanctuary, a place where she could work undisturbed among the artifacts that had become her closest companions. She'd been called in that October night because of reports from security guards about unusual moisture appearing around several statues in the classical wing. Moisture was the enemy of preservation, and Sarah approached each case like a detective solving a crime against history. The restricted wing housed the museum's most controversial pieces, artifacts with questionable provenance, statues donated by wealthy collectors who asked no questions about origin, and pieces that came with whispered warnings from previous curators. Sarah had always dismissed the folklore surrounding these items as the romantic nonsense of people who spent too much time alone with art. But as she stood in the echoing corridor that night, her rational mind began to crack like aged marble. The Saint Agatha statue, a 16th century masterpiece depicting the patron saint of breast cancer patients, had developed what appeared to be rust stains streaming from her eyes. Except rust didn't flow like tears, and it certainly didn't smell metallic and warm. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from her assistant. Found the donor records you wanted. The Blackwood collection files are on your desk. Some weird stuff in there. Photos, letters, police reports. The Blackwood collection. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the museum's climate control. Marcus Blackwood had been one of the museum's most generous benefactors in the 1990s, donating over 30 sculptures before his mysterious disappearance. The statues in the restricted wing, they were all his donations. Sarah returned to her office, leaving the weeping statue for the moment. The Blackwood files waited on her desk like a confession left by a dead man. As she opened the first folder, Polaroid photographs scattered across her workspace. Images of the same statues that now resided in the museum, but photographed in what appeared to be private homes, gardens, and crime scenes. The first photo showed Saint Agatha in what looked like a basement, surrounded by evidence markers. A police report, faded and partially redacted, described the discovery of human remains beneath the statue's base during a 1989 investigation into the disappearance of a young woman named Maria Santos. Sarah's hands trembled as she turned the page. Another photo, the bronze statue of David that stood in the East Wing, positioned in what appeared to be a child's bedroom. The accompanying report detailed the investigation into the disappearance of 12-year-old Tommy Richardson in 1987. The statue had been found in the family's garden, installed just days before the boy vanished. If you're finding this story as chilling as Sarah is, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that like button. We dive deep into the darkest mysteries. And trust me, this is just the beginning of Sarah's nightmare. As Sarah read deeper into the files, a horrifying pattern emerged. Each statue in the Blackwood collection had been present at the scene of an unsolved disappearance or murder. Not just present, they had been deliberately placed there like monuments to horror, silent witnesses to unspeakable acts. The files contained letters in Marcus Blackwood's handwriting, growing increasingly erratic over the years. The statues remember everything. They absorb the trauma, hold it like sponges hold water. I thought I was collecting art, but I was collecting evidence. They won't let me forget what I've done. I can hear them whispering at night. 10 victims, 10 statues. Each one calls out the name of the person whose life I stole. I try to silence them by donating them to the museum, but distance doesn't matter. They're still connected to me. The blood is how they communicate. When they cry, they're trying to tell someone about the bodies, about where I buried them. I thought marble couldn't hold memory, but I was wrong. So very wrong. Sarah felt the world tilt beneath her feet. She was reading the confession of a serial killer, a man who had used his art collection as a twisted memorial to his victims. But Marcus Blackwood had disappeared 15 years ago, and these statues have been sitting in the museum ever since, growing more active with each passing year. She rushed back to the restricted wing, her heart hammering against her ribs. The St. Agatha statue was no longer merely weeping. Blood had pooled at its base, forming symbols that looked almost like letters. Sarah knelt down, her phone's flashlight illuminating the crimson message. Maria, the name from the police report. Maria Santos, the first victim. As Sarah stood, she noticed movement in her peripheral vision. The bronze David in the adjacent room. Was it facing a different direction than before? She approached slowly, her footsteps echoing like gunshots in the silence. At the base of David, more blood, more letters. T-O-M-Y. Sarah's rational mind screamed that this was impossible, but her eyes couldn't deny what they saw. She pulled out her phone to call security, but there was no signal in the restricted wing. She was alone with 10 statues that had become the graveyards of 10 souls. The lights flickered, and in that moment of darkness, Sarah heard something that made her blood freeze. The sound of stone grinding against stone, as if the statues were moving. When the lights steadied, Sarah found herself surrounded. Every statue in the restricted wing had somehow shifted position, all of them now facing her, their marble and bronze eyes fixed on her living form. The blood had spread, flowing between the pedestals, creating a network of crimson connections that pulsed like veins. Sarah ran toward the exit, but the heavy security door slammed shut with a sound like a coffin closing. The electronic lock blinked red. She was trapped in a tomb of her own making. The statues began to weep in earnest now, blood cascading from their eyes like waterfalls of grief. And in that blood, Sarah saw images, flashes of memory that belonged to the victims. Maria Santos, a young artist who had trusted Marcus Blackwood when he offered to buy her sculptures. Tommy Richardson, a boy who had wandered into Blackwood's garden chasing a lost ball. 8 others, each lured by kindness, each silenced by madness. But the visions showed her something else, the location of the bodies. Blackwood had buried them in his private estate, now abandoned and overgrown. The statues weren't just memorials. They were anchors tethering the victims' spirits to the world of the living, preventing them from finding peace. Sarah understood with crystal clarity that she had 2 choices: become the 11th victim or help the 10 souls find justice. She pressed her hands against the nearest statue, feeling the cold marble pulse beneath her palms. "I can help you," she whispered. "I know where your bodies are. I can bring you home." The weeping slowed, and in the silence, Sarah heard whispers, 10 voices speaking in unison, telling her exactly what she needed to do. This is where everything changes for Sarah. If this story is keeping you on the edge of your seat, don't forget to subscribe and like this video. The ending will blow your mind. Sarah spent the rest of the night documenting everything, photographing the blood messages, copying the police reports, mapping the location of Blackwood's estate from the property records and the files. By dawn, she had compiled a dossier that could reopen 10 cold cases and finally give families the closure they've been seeking for decades. The statues had stopped weeping by the time the morning security shift arrived. Sarah presented her findings to the police, who initially dismissed her claims as the fantasy of an overworked academic. But when the first excavation at the Blackwood estate uncovered Maria Santos remains exactly where the statue had indicated, the investigation exploded into national news. One by one, the bodies were found and identified. 10 families finally learned the fate of their missing loved ones. Marcus Blackwood was declared dead in absentia, his crimes finally brought to light through the testimony of stone witnesses. But Sarah's ordeal wasn't over. As each body was discovered and given a proper burial, its corresponding statue began to change. The marble grew lighter, the bronze warmer. The perpetual chill that had haunted the restricted wing lifted like a broken fever. Sarah realized that the statues had never been cursed. They had been consecrated by grief, transformed into vessels of justice by the very souls Blackwood thought he had silenced forever. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the museum's memorial garden, watching as the 10 statues were arranged in a place of honor. They had been cleansed of their dark history and repurposed as a monument to the victim's memory. Plaques bearing the names of Maria, Tommy, and the 8 others gleamed in the afternoon sun. The Blackwood collection had become the Santos Richardson Memorial Garden, a place where families could come to remember and find peace. The statues no longer wept blood. Instead, they caught rainwater in small basins at their bases, creating reflecting pools that mirrored the sky. Sarah had learned something profound about the nature of memory and material. Art doesn't just capture beauty. It absorbs the emotions and experiences of everyone who encounters it. Love, hatred, joy, terror, all of it becomes part of the sculpture's story, layered like sediment in stone. She thought about Marcus Blackwood, a man who had tried to use art to hide his crimes, only to discover that art has its own justice. The statues hadn't been his accomplices. They had been his accusers, waiting patiently for someone who could understand their language of blood and tears. The museum visitors often asked Sarah about the memorial garden, and she always told them the same thing. These statues remind us that the dead don't stay silent forever. Sometimes it just takes the right person to hear what they're trying to say. As the sun set over the memorial garden, Sarah placed fresh flowers at each statue's base. In the growing twilight, she could swear she heard whispers of gratitude carried on the evening breeze. 10 voices finally at peace, their stories told, their justice served. The last thing she always told visitors was this: art remembers everything. Every emotion, every story, every secret. It's not just decoration. It's history written in stone, waiting for someone brave enough to read it. That's the end of Sarah's incredible story. What did you think? Were you expecting that twist about the statues being witnesses rather than cursed objects? Drop a comment below and let us know what city you're watching from, and if there's a particular song or band you'd like us to create a story around next time. Your suggestions help us craft these mysterious tales that blur the line between reality and nightmare. Until next time, remember, sometimes the most beautiful art holds the darkest secrets.